Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. It's our WordPress Focus Week. And I've got to say, I have a ton of energy for today's explainer because we're tackling such a fascinating topic. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the WordPress REST API, specifically what it's exposing by default and what most WordPress sites really should be restricting. Okay, let's just dive right into this.
So what exactly is your WordPress site exposing by default? As someone who spends a lot of time conducting security assessments, I can tell you firsthand that this is one of those areas where the out-of-the-box configuration is often way less secure than site owners actually realize. We all kind of tend to assume that default settings are safely locked down. But when it comes to the REST API, you might literally be broadcasting information you never intended to share.
Section 1. Understanding the REST API. Let's map out that digital footprint.
Okay, so the WordPress REST API, basically, it's an interface that allows external applications to interact with your WordPress data using standard HTTP requests. And get this, it's been enabled by default in every single WordPress installation since version 4.7. The base URL you'll see is usually your site's domain followed by wp-json. Now, I want to be super clear here. The security question isn't whether the REST API is a useful feature. It absolutely is. It's a fantastic tool for legitimate headless WordPress setups, mobile apps, and third-party integrations. The real question we need to ask is which endpoints are accessible completely without authentication.
Section 2. Exposed by default, without authentication. When we audit these endpoints, it breaks down into a few distinct threat levels. For instance, unauthenticated access to /wp/v2/posts simply returns published content. That's a low threat and totally acceptable, right? It's just information that's already visible on the front end of your site. Then you have the /wp-json/endpoint index. This returns a complete list of all available endpoints. It's incredibly useful for legitimate developers, sure, but it's also very useful for attackers trying to map out your API surface. But the real kicker? The /wp/v2/users endpoint, that is a high-risk exposure, and by default, it is sitting wide open. Section 3. The user enumeration risk.
Here is the crucial point. This is exactly what happens when someone makes a simple GET request to that user's endpoint. The JSON response freely hands over a list of users who have published content on your site. And if you look closely at the data returned, there's a highly critical field in there. user_login. That's not a nickname. That is the actual literal username used to authenticate. And since the main admin account on the vast majority of WordPress sites has published at least one post or page, that means the admin's exact login name is publicly enumerable right there, requiring zero authentication.
Think about the real-world impact of that exposure for a second. Before an attacker leverages the REST API, they're facing your login screen with two huge unknowns. They don't know the username, and they don't know the password. They're just guessing in the dark. But after they query that open API endpoint, the attacker now has a confirmed username. This simple, unauthenticated GET request literally halves the attacker's workload. If they're running a brute force or a credential stuffing campaign against your login page, they already have 50% of the credential pair they need. Section 4. Locking down endpoints and implementing the fix. The good news? Fixing this is incredibly straightforward. By adding a specific PHP filter to your functions.php file, you are essentially telling WordPress to unset that /wp/v2/users endpoint. It just removes it from the routing table for public access entirely. And the true beauty of this targeted approach is that your authenticated requests will still work perfectly for any integrations that actually need them. But that unauthenticated username enumeration, completely blocked. It is a massive security win for just a few lines of code. Section 5. Auditing application passwords and API authentication. Now, if you aren't familiar with them, application passwords are long-lived credentials generated specifically for API authentication. They are completely, entirely separate from your main account password. And what's absolutely vital to understand here is that these passwords authenticate directly to the REST API. They do not go through your standard wp-login.php page at all. Because of how they operate, there are some pretty severe security implications. First off, application passwords do not expire by default. So a credential created 2 years ago for a plugin you deleted a year ago, yeah, it's still perfectly valid until you explicitly revoke it. Second, they completely bypassed moved login URLs. If you went through the trouble of hiding your login page for security, it doesn't matter because the REST API doesn't use that page. And finally, they can entirely bypass the standard login rate limiting you might have set up. Basically, an attacker who finds an orphaned application password has a direct, unrestricted pipeline straight into your site. So here is your direct action plan for this issue. Log into your WordPress dashboard and follow this audit path. Go to Users, then Profile, and scroll down until you see Application Passwords. Your required action today is to revoke any unused or unrecognized credentials immediately. In professional security assessments, finding orphaned credentials from past integrations just sitting there active is an incredibly consistent and really dangerous finding. Just clean them out. Section 6. The takeaway and your practical next steps.
All right, here's your immediate homework, summarized in 3 easy steps. Number 1, restrict that user's endpoint. I promise you, username enumeration has no legitimate public use case for most WordPress sites. Number 2, audit your application passwords and revoke anything that isn't actively attached to a current integration. And number 3, review your endpoint index by visiting /wp-json on your own site. Truly understand exactly what your API is exposing without authentication and ask yourself if that exposure is intentional. Honestly, adjusting these overly permissive defaults takes only a few minutes.
I want to leave you with this guiding philosophy from our source material today, courtesy of @IamJustApe. The default configuration exposes more than most sites need to. Stay informed, stay protected. The REST API is a genuinely fantastic, useful feature, but it requires your active management to actually stay secure. So, before you close out of this explainer and get back to your Thursday, I want you to think about this one final question. Who is reading your API right now? Don't just guess, go check it for yourself. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.